Vinyl liner, fiberglass, gunite, these are some of the common pool types that you have likely heard of if you are looking into a pool project. Which one is the best fit? It all depends. Today we're going to go over some of the pros and cons of each of the pool types, so that way you can have all the facts presented to you and hopefully make the best educated decision for you and your family and your backyard. Let's first talk about the vinyl liner, which is a really common pool type. It was very popular, over the last 5 to 10 years. Over time, it's kind of lost its popularity as homeowners are experiencing some of the downsides of the vinyl liner. They are starting to transition to some of the other pool types like the fiberglass and the gunite that may have less troubles. Let's talk about what the troubles are. With the vinyl liner pool, you do have to replace the liner, which isn't the end of the world. It's just something that you need to understand when going into the purchase. On average, we find that a liner needs to be replaced every 5 to 7 years. There's definitely exceptions to the rule. I've had some clients report that maybe they had a friend or a family member and they hadn't had to replace their liner for 10 to 12 years. Here is one thing that I will say about that. I do find that you can technically have a liner that lasts 10 to 12 years. And yes, technically the pool is holding water. But I will say that usually at that point, the liner has lost all of its original coloring. It's maybe bleached white, and the pool just doesn't really look too appealing. And that's important because when we're doing these pool projects, we are actually trying to make sure that the backyard is elevated as well. We don't install a pool wanting the backyard to look worse. We want it to look better, but also get some of that functionality out of it as far as the actual swimming goes. So that's something worth noting. On the contrary, there's also times where a liner might need to be replaced earlier than that. And that's mainly from user error. Maybe if someone vacuums incorrectly or does something improperly and you puncture a hole in the liner, and now what would usually be a 5-6 year time frame replacement is now something that you're doing only on the 3rd season. So that stuff happens. It happens every year with liner pools, and it's just worth knowing. So the pros to a liner is that you can get in the ground at a lower cost. So having the pool installed up front is lower than all of the pool types, but of course ownership cost usually starts to creep up and usually equals the cost of a fiberglass at a minimum, but oftentimes will exceed. It can even exceed that of a gunite if you have the pool long enough. From an install standpoint, it usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks for installing a liner pool, which is generally very comparable to the fiberglass, so not much of a difference there. So now we're going to talk about the fiberglass pools. Fiberglass pools are medium in terms of upfront cost. They do cost more than the liners, but they cost less than that of a gunite. Some of the cons are that there are a lot of limitations from a design standpoint. Manufacturers do a very good job at combating that by having a large array of designs and sizes to choose from. Most of the time when we're meeting with clients and we're doing those consultations, we have no issue finding a fiberglass pool that works for them. Every client is usually able to find a model that they just fall in love with. But of course, there are definitely instances where that's not the case. Maybe the house has a particular setup and there's certain features and certain places they wish those features were located on the pool that you just are not able to find with the fiberglass. And that's when you might consider something like the gunite, where you can custom build anything. So that's just one of the drawbacks with fiberglass, is that either you go to a gunite to get exactly what you want, or you luck out and you find a model that is exactly what you want, which is common, or you're making some form of a compromise. Some of the pros to the fiberglass is, for one, long-term ownership. Once the pool is installed, that's pretty much it. There's no liner replacement. You're not resurfacing the plaster. One of the main questions I get is, what about the gel coat? And that's a maybe. And what I mean by that is that this pool is going to be good for virtually 20 to 30 years, no problem. Once you get to that 20 to 30 year mark, however, you can run into some aesthetic changes to the pool. And what I mean by that is maybe your gel coat just doesn't look quite as pristine as when it was originally installed. And that's because the pool is sitting in the sun for the next 20, 30 years. every day. So it's just not going to look the same as it was when it was originally installed. But at least at that point, you are making a decision based off aesthetic. Nothing structural. With the liner, you are making a decision because the pool is not holding water anymore. And the same thing goes with some of the ownership cost of the Gunite pool. Maybe the plaster needs to be redone, and swimmers are getting in the pool and they're getting little cuts on their foot from some of the chipping that's happening from the plaster, which overall is something that you don't want your swimmers to experience, which pretty much puts you in a corner and forces you to have to resurface it in a Gunite pool. So fiberglass pools, typically you do not run into anything along those lines. So it's one of those things where you pay a little bit more up front, and then over time, your cost, there's actually a lot of savings because you're not worrying about replacing the liner and doing things of that nature. Now, from an installation standpoint, fiberglass pools, they vary. 4 to 6 weeks tends to be a standard, although there are instances where they're faster than that. You could have a 2-week installation, 3-week installation. Very uncommon, doesn't happen all the time. Maybe for us, it happens a few pools out of the season, but 4 to 6 weeks for everything as far as the concrete decking and surround, that tends to be pretty realistic for each pool project that we take on. So very comparable to the liner pool. The last pool type we have is the Gunite pool. Some of the main pros and advantages with the Gunite is that you can design anything. So you can do the biggest, the smallest. You could do it as wide as you want, as deep as you want. You could have your features exactly how you want them to be and the locations that you want them to be. So you have full leeway with the customization. Some of the downsides is that they are higher upfront cost, and they do also have high ownership cost. So just the material from the Gunite and just the installation time frame usually results in them being higher than the other pool types. And you do have to resurface the plaster, every 10 to 15 years on average. So a Gunite pool really makes sense for clients that just are not able to find something that they like out of the fiberglass and would really appreciate to have all of that customization at their arsenal. But it does have the high ownership cost. That's just something to think about when pursuing that route. Most of the time when we're sitting down and we're interviewing customers and we're asking them, what do they want to get out of the pool? What do they think about long-term costs? One of the most common things I hear is we want something that we don't have to worry about. We want something that once it's in the ground, that's pretty much it for the foreseeable future. We want something that I don't have to worry about, vacuuming improperly or doing the wrong thing that might puncture a hole. And that's where we typically land on the fiberglass. And like I said, although fiberglass does have design limitations, there's so many different options to choose from that we hardly ever have that issue. But there are definitely instances where I'm sitting down, talking to a client, understanding what they want to get out of the project and what their long-term goal is. And sometimes the fiberglass pool is not the right fit, which is something that I'm very honest about. Whether it's a liner or a Gunite, I try to just be helpful. That's the main goal. So I do find that the fiberglass is usually the right fit for a lot of families, more than the liner and more than the Gunite. Overall, it just comes down to preference. And really, when I sit down and I understand the grand picture and what the client or family is looking to get out of the pool, sometimes fiberglass makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. One important note is that everything I listed as far as time frame and ownership are all assuming that the pool was installed properly. No matter the pool type, that is almost the number one most important thing. Of course, you can pick pool types that are going to hold up better long term, fiberglass versus the liner. But ultimately, how your pool is installed is the number one problem. A lot of the issues I listed are just from the pool type itself, but if your pool was not installed correctly, then you're going to have a world of structural issues to take care of, and the cost with that could be anywhere. You never know, it just depends on how bad it is. So that's just something to also think about, as you're looking into this. How your pool is installed, who's installing it, that's very important, and that's something that you also want to consider beyond just pool type. So hopefully this video helped give you some pros and cons for the different styles of pools, and I hope you now feel more educated and confident going into the pool and making that decision. Of course, if you have any questions, let me know if there's something that maybe we missed. But either way, I hope this video was helpful, and thank you for watching.